all for being here. When Winter Storm Elliott hit, U.S. travelers experienced an airline debacle of enormous proportions. While bad weather can happen and is expected, and many airlines recovered quickly, Southwest stood out on its scope of the problems it faced. Over 2 million Southwest passengers suffered consequences, separated from family and friends, not to mention their luggage, and hundreds of thousands of people stranded at airports across the country. We know that many of them had no clear instructions about what to do next. For example, I heard from many of my constituents in the state of Washington about these issues. I heard from a coach of Rainier High School basketball team in Seattle. He and his wife went through a tremendous ordeal. It's very important that we understand that consumers do like Southwest Airlines point-to-point service. They like that the airline does have many benefits, and they like the friendly flight that they get from their pilots and many of their workers. But Coach Bethia and his wife and traveling party of more than 24 players and parents traveled to Las Vegas on Southwest for a holiday basketball tournament. They were scheduled to fly back to Seattle on December 23rd, but Southwest canceled the flight. When Coach Bethia and his wife contacted Southwest, they were basically told, "You're on your own." And they were on their own, all of them. All of those kids and parents stuck in Las Vegas trying to figure out what to do next. They needed hotel rooms, they needed meals, they wanted to try to figure out if they could to salvage their Christmas holiday. They ended up stranded in Las Vegas for 5 days, spending more than $10,000 on hotels and food, and with no idea how they might get back home. Mercifully, a friend offered to front the cost of a charter bus, and finally, 18 hours later, through the snow, they made it back to Seattle. Here's what really struck me, though, when I talked to the coach and his wife and many other people I have talked to. They wanted to know, after their flight was canceled, what were the alternatives? What could they do to get back home, particularly because it was the holiday season? And even though they were missing time with family and friends at Christmas, they also wanted to know about those out-of-pocket expenses, thousands of dollars that they wanted to make sure that they received some information about on how they might get reimbursed. When I spoke to Coach Bethia and his wife recently, they wanted to ask one question. Mr. Watterson, they wanted me to ask you, and I know you're a busy guy, but what they really wanted was for you to call them. Like many of our consumers, they felt like they were getting the short end of the stick. They didn't know how to communicate to anyone, to answer their questions on how long they were stuck. I know that many of these issues Mr. Hudson is going to talk about, and we'll have some ideas. I know we're going to hear about how we can move consumers around more effectively. But doing better also means that making sure that we're not going to give consumers the short end of the stick. We need to make sure we're investing in technology and the surge capacity that I'm sure we're going to hear about, and I'm sure we're going to hear about what could have been done before this that would have helped. We're always going to have these weather events, and some of us believe they're going to become more severe. But what we want is to have a system that is ready to address that and to talk about the alternatives. Captain Murray, president of the Southwest Airline Pilots Association, will tell us for years there was warnings of the need to modernize the IT system that was dated. I hope Mr. Watterson can explain why those warnings went unheard. From mandatory overtime shifts, there was a stretch into all these conditions, and I do want to thank all the workers that worked those many hours to try to help this recover. I know many of my constituents said how grateful they were for the individual workers who showed compassion and tried to help them. But I do believe this sector needs a more effective policeman on the beat. They need someone over at the Department of Transportation who is going to get the job done. When we need to make sure that consumers are consulted, that their reimbursement fees aren't continually being held up, or as the president said the other night, making sure that children get the access to seat next to their parents. I know that these things seem like very basic consumer issues, but somehow they have been taken for granted. And I think that this incident shows us that we have to get serious about this. Our committee has the opportunity to implement change, resiliency in an air transportation system that every member of this committee values. We value it and we want to grow it, but we can't do it on the backs of consumers. So Mr. Watterson, if you will call my constituent, I will feel better that you will be hearing the real voices of consumers directly. Thank you. Senator Cruz.